Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of the 411 Ground and Pound MMA podcast. We are your weekly look into the wide, wacky, wonderful world of mixed martial arts. My name is Robert Winfree, and I am your host. Thank you so very, very much for being here, for tuning in. It's always appreciated. If you could interact with the product a little bit, like, comment, subscribe, written review, star rating, any and all of that, and most importantly, sharing. Let other people know about the show, be that in real life or purely on the digital realm, however that works, or both. Both is good. Both is usually good. Any of that, again, it all helps a lot, and I am eternally grateful for any of you that listen. It means a lot to me. I do this because I enjoy it. I say that all the time. And if there's anyone out there listening, that's more than enough for me to continue having a good time talking about the stuff that I enjoy. So, thank you very, very much, as always. On the agenda this evening, last night, UFC on ESPN 39 was a card. Not the worst. Not the worst card, not the best. But we will go over all of the results from that. And this upcoming week, early in the morning actually, UFC on ABC 3 this Saturday, the prelims begin at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. So if you're planning on watching this live, depending on where you are in the world, that might be a pain in the butt. It is for me. That's 9 in the morning where I live. I live in Mountain Standard Time. Yeah, I'm not terribly happy about that. I am not a morning person and have not been since I was in utero. But we'll have a full preview of that event and news of the week such as it exists. All right. With all of that out of the way, let's jump right in. I don't have anything else to really go over here. UFC on ESPN 39. Your main event. There can be only one Rafael. Rafael Fiziev defeats Rafael dos Anjos. And I've just got to say, the fact that in the immediate aftermath he said, we now know who the best Rafael is in the UFC, but I wish to be the best Rafael in the world, so Rafael Nadal, I'm coming for you. Uh, Rafael Nadal, of course, being one of the all-time great tennis pros who just recently had to bow out of Wimbledon that's going on? I believe it's Wimbledon. If it's not Wimbledon, it's the U.S. Open. So again, forgive me, I forget exactly which one's good, but major tennis tournament. And Nadal is, again, he is one of the all-time greats. If you appreciate tennis, I know plenty of people who appreciate it more than I do. I do in kind of a surface level. He's a genuinely remarkable, arguably the greatest ever. Like, he's phenomenal. And he just immediately, like, he had that rehearsed. Like, he had that ready to go. Like, I will be the best Rafael in all humanity, and Nadal, I'm coming for you. uh, Fiziev's got a fun. It doesn't always come across. I don't know if it's a language barrier or whatnot, but he's got a kind of a funny little personality. The fight itself was, so again, Fiziev wins. He knocks out Dos Anjos with punches 18 seconds into the fifth and final round. The fight itself went about, I think, how a lot of us expected it to. I gave Dos Anjos I think it was the fourth round I gave him. It was 3 or 4, I can't remember. One of those 2 rounds. I forget which one specifically, but so forgive me. But the other 3 rounds I thought were pretty clearly for Fiziev. They traded some kicks at distance. Fiziev kept doing his looking for his lean back, like he does that kind of limbo like matrix thing. He got kind of famous for doing it. Someone kicks at his head, he just bends backwards at the waist and lets it kind of shoot over. He kept trying to do that. Dos Anjos doesn't really kick to the head. He kicks to the body a lot, so he actually landed a few of them when Fiziev was trying to do the lean back. It's great for getting your head out of the way if you're limber enough and fast enough to do it, but it doesn't do much for your body. It does some, but not much, and he kept getting hit in the body when trying to do it. It was a little bit of a misread on his part, I think. But anytime they got into kind of punching range, Fiziev has some fast hands, and he's really good about varying his speed and intensity. Sometimes it's just kind of touching. Then he'll pepper in with all of the little, tap, tap, boom, which is a really effective way to fight. This is one of the things you have to try and get newer people to do. And not even newer people, like newer people, depending on where you're starting from. Like if you have to build them from the beginning, then the number of people who don't even know how to make a proper fist or how to punch with a proper fist is shockingly high. But once you get people, kind of sparring a bit more, and you need to get them to kind of work on their energy and whatnot, uh, that's one of the things you have to get them to do. You vary your speed. Not everything is 100%. Not everything's full intensity. You can't fight that way. It's not sustainable physiologically. So you just kind of, all right. I mean, even if it wasn't physiological, if everything's always the same, it's easier to predict defensively. If I know every punch you throw is going to be a certain amount of speed, a certain amount of intensity, et cetera, it becomes more predictable. So you vary it. Some punches come a little bit slower, some come a little bit faster, some harder, softer. You start to vary that up. And he's very good about that. He is really good. Uh, Especially the longer this fight went on. It's like, okay, tap, 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 boom, tap, tap. Like, just kind of mixing that up. And it got to Dos Anjos a little bit. The body work from Fiziev, I think, got to Dos Anjos a little bit at various points. He got away from it, and I think it was a bit of a mistake. There were a few different points when he would catch Dos Anjos with some kind of a body kick, and it would just you could see the posture shift a little bit. And Dos Anjos has a great poker face, but you could see again not just the body posture, but one of the ways you can tell your body work is paying off is if the opponent stops doing what they were doing. If they were coming forward pretty aggressively, you catch them to the body, even if they don't show a whole lot. If they stop coming forward, if they stop throwing, if they take a second, that worked. And I think his body work was getting to Dos Anjos at a few different points. Never enough to really kind of lock him up or anything, but enough to deter his pressure. The takedown defense from Fiziev held up very, very well. I think Dos Anjos was officially credited with one takedown. A lot of clinching, where Fiziev did quite well against a guy who was very good on the clinch. And I certainly don't mean to imply that Dos Anjos had nothing for Fiziev the whole fight. He landed some good punches. He landed some good body kicks. Dos Anjos was... He's just a... I have a lot of respect for Dos Anjos. Just let me preface what I'm about to say with that. I have advocated for him as a genuine great in the lightweight division's history. He's been with the UFC forever. Like, he debuted for the UFC in 2008. That's only a few years after I graduated from high school. Like, this guy's been in the... And look at who he's fought. Like, he fought everybody at lightweight, including the best lightweights of his era. He took the belt from Anthony Pettis when most people didn't expect him to. He smoked Donald Cerrone to defend it. He was beating Eddie Alvarez before Alvarez kind of caught him with that punch that led to him losing the belt. But he fought Tony Ferguson in Mexico Mexico City for 5 rounds. He fought Khabib. He lost both of those fights, but he fought everybody. Then he moved up to welterweight, and look at who he fought at welterweight, for crying out loud. He fought the two best welterweights in the world, in the UFC certainly. He fought both Usman and Covington. He fought Robbie Lawler. He fought Michael Chiesa. He fought Leon Edwards. Like, those are you could argue the 3 best welterweights in the UFC right now, and I think this is probably accurate. Usman, Covington, and Edwards. And he fought all 3 of them. And frankly, he lost fairly, but he was not obliterated. None of them finished him. And that's not the craziest thing in the world when you consider when he fought Usman. I mean, he fought Usman 2018, so Usman wasn't much of a finisher at that point. He fought Covington before that. The Covington fight was an interim title fight too, wasn't it? Yeah. Was lightweight champion, fought for the interim belt at welterweight. Fought everybody. I mean, he beat Benson Henderson. That was his big coming out win. When Henderson was not too far off of his lightweight title reign, he beat Nate Diaz. He beat the crap out of Nate Diaz. If you haven't seen that fight, look it up. He abuses Diaz. He beat, again, as I mentioned, Pettis for the belt. He's just fought everybody over a fairly lengthy UFC tenure at this point. We're talking 14 years. Nearly 15, right? When did he debut? November of 08. He's coming up on 14 years and a lot of fights in the UFC. And a lot of fights in general. This is his 45th professional fight. This was the first time he'd been stopped with strikes since the Alvarez fight, actually. So the first time in, what, July of 16? So first time in 6 years. Yeah, literally a shade over 6 years. The man is a great. He is forgotten. He is slept on. He is overlooked, and it's a crying shame. So that is keep that in mind when I say what I'm about to say. At this point in his career, he was here to be a very, very stiff test for a guy that looks like he's very much on the come up, and he was that. He tested Fiziev's grappling. He tested his clinch work. He tested his cardio. This wasn't fought at the craziest pace, but it was not a. This was not a slow fight. And Fiziev, to his credit, passed every one of those tests with flying colors, more or less. He did a great job with his offensive shot selection. Did a good job defensively wrestling. This was a really big fight for Fiziev, and to get a finish that late in a fight is a bit of a rarity. To do it over a guy like Dos Anjos, even rarer. Like I said, that's the second time in several years. How many times has he been finished with strikes overall? Uh, this guy's only been stopped via TKO or knockout 3 times in his entire career. Yeah, the knockout against Jeremy Stephens in his UFC debut, the TKO to Alvarez, and then this one, and that's it. Uh, that guy's insanely durable, and you take him out, that says something. So, a lot of credit to Fiziev. He said after the fact that he wants to fight. I mean, the jokes about Nadal aside, he wants to fight someone near in the top 5. He was 10 coming into this. Dos Anjos was 7. I think he and Justin Gaethje started kind of chirping at each other. I mean, who in the world would complain about that fight? Lightweight's a bit complicated. I went over this a little bit last week when talking about the potential addition of Alexander Volkanovski to the title picture. You had Gamrot, who just had a breakthrough fight. You have Fiziev, who's now going to be deserving of a top 5 opponent. You've got Makhachev and Oliveira, theoretically, the obvious fight for the vacant title. You've got Michael Chandler and Dustin Poirier. Again, I would think that's an obvious fight to make. Whether or not it gets made is an entirely different issue, but who could, those two going at it, like, yes, please. Please, yes. So you've got a lot of guys. I mean, Gamrot called out Gaethje, and very few people do that. So you've got a lot of guys right now who are just kind of stewing around, and you're going to get some great fights out of these fighters. So I'm very curious to see what exactly happens. But Fiziev is definitely deserving of another big name opponent, certainly a high-ranking opponent. Dude's a legitimate contender at this point, and good for him. The finishing sequence actually was really nice. He's fighting orthodox. He throws a step-through knee, so he starts orthodox, throws the knee, lands forward into southpaw. As he lands, he throws a right hand that just kind of brings Dos Anjos' guard up, kind of slaps at it, and then he follows up with a left overhand. Dos Anjos seems to think that left overhand is coming lower than it is, because Dos Anjos is also southpaw. So now that left is coming over his lead shoulder, and instead of getting down behind the lead shoulder with the guard high, he kind of reaches out to kind of parry. The shoulder relaxes. It's not as high. Gives a nice opening for the punch to connect to the jaw. Perfectly fine stoppage. Dos Anjos never complained about it. He got dropped. His head kind of bounced off the canvas. Another punch followed up. I know he did not appear to be completely out. The referee waves it off, and he kind of half sits up, but he knew he was out. Very, very good stoppage by the referee in this one. So, wanted to say that. I don't know what's next for Dos Anjos. The man is 30, 7? He will be 38 in October, actually. That's pretty old for lightweight. It just is. He apparently wants to stay busy at least to kind of. I don't know if he's not. I don't think he's going to become a legitimate title contender again. I'm not sure that's in the cards for him at this point. So if he just wants to make some more money before he has to retire, then he'll probably want to keep a busier schedule. I He could fight a lot of people in that division. They will make for great fights. He will be a very, very difficult test for them. But I do think his title challenging days are probably over at this point. And we should enjoy him while we still can because he's not going to be here too much longer, is my hunch. You close in on 50 fights, this many over a decade with the UFC, always willing to fight the toughest opponents. That adds up. And he trained with Shootbox for a while. So, not just Shootbox, but sorry, not Shootbox. Cordero's camp, King's MMA, because Cordero was the Shootbox guy. He might be again. I forget exactly where he trained, but Cordero's philosophy is, you go to war in the gym. So Dos Anjos was part of some very heavy sparring training sessions and whatnot. So I guarantee you, he's been through it physically. I don't know how much longer we're going to have him in the sport, but enjoy him while he lasts. And can we get some appreciation for what he has done? Because I don't think enough people understand how great he is. That was your main event. Again, solid fight. Really solid fight. Co-main event. Caio Borralho defeats Armen Petrosyan via unanimous decision, 230-27, 129-28. Borralho was just able to get Petrosyan down, get his back, threaten him, work from there. Third round, I think I gave to Petrosyan. That one was a lot more on the feet, but by that point, Petrosyan was just too far behind the 8-ball to make anything really happen. Not a great fight, but bantamweight. This was a pretty good fight. Said Nurmagomedov defeats Douglas Silva de Andrade via unanimous decision, 130-27 that I did not agree with, and 229-28, which I did. I thought Silva de Andrade kind of stole the first round. Is it the first? What was the one where they both got dropped? Hang on, I might be misremembering. Yeah, I am. I think I'm misremembering. Because there was one fight. Yeah, okay. No. Malarkey and Johnson's the one that I'm thinking of. Okay, so yeah, Nurmagomedov I believe got dropped kind of near the end of the first. I thought that was enough for De Andrade to steal it. Assuming I'm remembering correctly. There was one round where Nurmagomedov did the majority of the quality work, but there was something kind of near the end that was impactful enough to sway the score, to sway the round for me. Most of this was Nurmagomedov, superior striker, incredibly fast, incredibly dexterous kicker. Working at distance, he had some good takedowns. Anytime they got purely into boxing range, De Andrade had a power advantage, was able to find the target. Here's the other thing about Nurmagomedov. He defaults to spinning way too often, and Silva de Andrade made him pay for it a little bit. He's got to be more judicious about that because better fighters than Silva de Andrade are going to really punish him for that. Just as a thought. But Said Nurmagomedov is a very, very good fighter. It's very good kicks, good takedowns. He's legit. He's a legitimate rising force at bantamweight, so good for him. This was a perfectly fine fight. Heavyweights. Chase Sherman defeated Jared Vanderaa via TKO punches, 3:10 of the third. This was a crappy heavyweight fight. I don't have much of anything to say about this one. Bantamweight. Ayman Zahabi defeated Ricky Turcios via unanimous decision, 29-28 across the boards. Funny thing about this fight, I believe in this fight, Ricky Turcios had the lowest percentage of successful offense. We've seen fights where somebody doesn't get off a strike. So, to the extent that I understand that 0 is infinitely less than 1, which is actually mathematically true. But to the extent that someone was able to have a degree of success, Turcios threw. I'm gonna pull up the specific stats because this was funny. This was almost a comical stat line. I don't have a whole lot to say about the fight because there wasn't a whole lot to it, but Yet Tercios, in terms of total strikes, uh, he was over all 3 rounds. He was 27 of 235. He landed 11% of his significant strikes. Everything he threw was significant. However, they differentiate significant and insignificant strikes. Everything he threw was deemed significant. He had an 11% success accuracy rate. Like, that is horrible. I mean, no one lands 100% of the time, and if you can kind of get, what does Zahabi land at? Zahabi landed at 51%, which is pretty good. I think I've said that before. If you can land every other strike you throw, it's really good. So your percentage of success is in MMA in particular is a little bit like baseball. It's not quite as low as baseball batting averages. Where if you see someone that's hitting, high 300s, like that's really good. Anyone only landing 33%, that's on the low side, but that 40 to 50 is a lot closer to, I believe, the UFC average. And you get the high end guys like high 50s, low 60s. But 11% is that's one of the lowest ones of these I've ever seen. Tercios did a lot of feinting with key eyes. He did a lot of just striking that never got close. And Zahabi just made him miss, countered him, chipped at him from the outside, got him. This is not a very interesting fight. But I did want to point out the statistical bit there. 11% accuracy. Oof. And I'm not trying to dogpile on Ricky Tercios. I don't think Tercios is a bad fighter, but for the sake of this fight in particular, that is a rough statistic. And kicking off the main card, Jamie Mullarkey defeats Michael Johnson via split decision. 129-28 for Johnson, 229-28 for Mullarkey. This was your fight of the night. These two had a fun little brawl. Both of them got dropped in the first round. Pretty handily, actually. I think that saved the round for Mullarkey, actually. He gets dropped by Johnson with a left hand at one point. He fights back up, and then towards the end of the round, he drops Johnson. And once the knockdowns are essentially equalized, and I do think that Johnson's knockdown was more emphatic and probably was a bit more impactful than Mullarkey's. But when you factor Mullarkey's knockdown along with all of the other work he'd done throughout the course of that round, I thought it was enough to sway the round for him. Second round was a big round for Mullarkey. He went to town on Johnson in that round. Johnson kind of recovered in the third, and we got a really nice finishing sequence down the stretch. These two just beat the crap out of each other. Mullarkey's commitment to just kind of consistent work ultimately was kind of the difference maker here. Johnson has fast hands. He's still got some power, pretty obviously. So needs to be acknowledged, but he's just on the older side of things. He's been with the UFC for a long time. He's had moments of brilliance, but he's never really been able to string everything together. On his best night, on his best performance, Johnson is legitimately world class. I'm sure there are maybe specific fighters and champions that even on his best night he's never going to beat. I don't think he ever beats Khabib, but if you'll recall, I think people oversell what he did in that first little bit of the first round against Khabib because they're just kind of desperate to find chinks in Khabib's armor. But he did land some punches on the guy, and Khabib was not easy to hit. He stopped Dustin Poirier, which is not an easy thing to do at all necessarily, especially with strikes. So, again, on his best night, he's really good, but he's never found consistency. Mullarkey was just a consistently better fighter throughout the course of this one. Again, fight of the night, deservedly so. Fun little brawl. No real complaints. We did lose a fight between Cynthia Calvillo and Nina Nunes. Nunes had some kind of a stomach issue and illness related and withdrew from the fight. They rescheduled it for later. But if you're wondering what happened to that fight, that's what happened to that fight. As for the prelims, Cody Brundage defeats Tristan Gore via knockout punches, 350 of the third. Excuse me, of the first. Um, Gore. Brundage noted this when he talked about it. He got a good takedown. Only got kind of the one. Gore fought back to his feet, but anytime Gore would throw a leg kick, he wasn't great about moving his head when he was throwing the kicks. And Brundage snuck a right hand between his guard, clipped him on the chin, dropped him, and then he got on top and pounded him out. Solid win for Brundage. Gore, and I don't mean this unkindly, but Gore should probably not be in the UFC. I think this is true of pretty much everyone who has, three. He came into the UFC with 3 fights. Yeah, it was only 3 because they tried to. I don't want to say that the fights on The Ultimate Fighter don't mean anything because I think it's a little bit dismissive, and I don't mean that. But they don't mean what the UFC wants you to think they mean. They are legitimate fights in the sense that you train, you are sanctioned by the Athletic Commission. You sanctioned as an exhibition because of how they're reported. But you got 2 guys in there trying to knock each other out, so it's legitimate in that respect. But if your thought process is, well, you got 3 professional fights and then you won 3 fights on tough, well, you've really got a record of 6 fights, right? No, 1. 2, even with 6 fights, I don't think you should be in the UFC. It's way too soon. Tristan Gore is not being done any favors by being in the UFC at this point. Women's flyweight, Antonina Shevchenko defeated Courtney Casey via split decision. 29-28. Again, 1 for Casey, 2 for Shevchenko. Little bit of controversy here. A lot of people thought Casey won. If you scored this fight for Casey, I am not disagreeing with you. I think you can go 29-28 either way. It always sucks when the person who wins the most definitive round loses the fight. Most definitive round of this fight, 3rd round for Courtney Casey, bar none. No ifs, ands, or buts. That was the most definitive round. But you could pretty easily see the other 2 for. Oh, I meant to say this about the Johnson and Malarkey fight. It was split. Little bit of controversy there. I think 29-28 either way is perfectly fine. I think that fight tends to hinge on the first round. So, which knockdown did you think was more impactful, or which knockdown was better when you factor in everything else that happened in the round? That kind of thing. Casey joins she joined who are the other people who have this stat? Angela Hill, Jorge Masvidal. Who was the 4th? Clay Guida, I believe it was, who have lost 4 fights via split decision. It sucks for Casey. It really does. This fight could have gone her way. There is certainly an argument for it. I scored it for Shevchenko, but I don't think anyone can be sour about 29-28 either way here. I don't think that's. You can think Casey won and still understand that there's an argument for a Shevchenko scorecard. Featherweight David Onama defeated Garrett Armfield via technical submission arm triangle choke in the 2nd. Armfield took this fight on short notice. He replaced Austin Lingo on less than a week's notice. Almost makes me wonder, look at these 2 physically, I almost wonder if Armfield isn't more of a bantamweight. He was a fair bit smaller than Onama. Solid performance from Onama, good finish. If you can find the whole finishing sequence here, this is a really nice example of maintaining a submission attempt while the other guy is going through some proper defense. Armfield ran through a bunch of things to do to try and fight the arm triangle, and Onama never panicked, he never overcommitted and overadjusted trying to defend. And he is adjusting the whole time because you have to when they're defending, but he never overcorrects, he never overcommits, he stays committed to the attack, and Armfield is never able to get the big escape with the defenses he's using, and ultimately winds up again unconscious. So solid enough win for Onama. Let's see, light heavyweight action. Kennedy Nzechukwu defeated Carl Robertson via TKO. This was punches and elbows from mount and back mount. 2:19 of the third. The size difference here was significant. Nzechukwu did some good wrestling here. Not a whole lot to. There's not really a lot to go over here. He was the bigger man, imposed that particular strategy, got on top, pounded him out. Yeah. And kicking off the entire event, Said Yakub Kakramanov defeated Ronnie Lawrence via unanimous decision, 30-27 twice, and then a 30-26. I didn't quite get a 30-26, get a 10-8 in any of those three rounds, but I don't hate it. Kakramanov looked really good here. Better striker. Better. He got takedowns on a guy who was. I think somebody, the stats guy, I believe, mentioned it on Twitter that coming into this fight between Ronnie Lawrence's appearance on the Contender Series and his UFC fights, he had not been taken down and had scored a lot of takedowns. I'm say north of 20 across those three fights. And Kakramanov out-wrestled him pretty thoroughly. I think I said for a while that Kakramanov kind of impressed me with some of the stuff he's done outside the UFC. I liked his debut. So pay attention to that guy. Bantamweight, a lot of talented fighters. Right, that was the event. Your bonuses, I usually mention Fight of the Night when discussing it, but Fight of the Night, Malarkey and Johnson, no issues. Performances of the night went to Rafael Fiziev and Chase Sherman. Think they did Onama dirty there a little bit. Would have given the bonus to Onama before I gave it to Sherman. Heck, I would have given it to Brundage before I gave it to Sherman. But the UFC brass like what they like, and Sherman and Vandera was kind of a sloppy. It wasn't as slow as other heavyweight fights, and it didn't feature nearly as much clinching, so I imagine certain people who make these kinds of decisions were like, yes, that's the type of heavyweight action we want. Yeah. But, so all those people got the extra cash. Good on all of you. You deserve more money than you get, but that's true of everyone. So, if you are interested in reading my round-by-round scoring and full report, it is in the MMAZona411mania.com. Please do give it a read if you are so inclined. All right, moving on. This Saturday, I mentioned before, early in the morning, UFC on ABC 3. This is not a bad card. There's some stuff here that makes me go, ugh, but especially on the prelims. Yeah, there's some there. But there's some good stuff too. The main event I've been going back and forth on actually as I've been thinking about it. Featherweights, it's not outside the realm of possibility that we get our next featherweight title contender out of this fight, especially if it's Yair Rodriguez. But Brian Ortega fights Yair Rodriguez. And I said, I've been going back and forth on this one. I like Brian Ortega's game in a lot of respects, but he's only lost twice, and he's only lost to the two best featherweights in the world, Max Holloway and Alexander Volkanovski. That said, those losses were brutal. Max Holloway made his corner stop that fight between rounds 4 and 5. And there's a real argument to me that his corner should have stopped it between rounds 4 and 5 when he fought Volkanovski. He took a lot of damage in those fights. A lot. He's coming off of the loss to Volkanovski, but he is durable. In fact, he tends to take a lot of damage. And he's willing to engage in firefights like that. He's got good power, though. He's got a good diversity of his striking offense. In terms of mixing up punches, elbows, kicks, and knees, he's not one-dimensional there. His defense is lacking. He's shown bits and pieces where it looked better. I mean, look, Max Holloway makes anyone who isn't Alexander Volkanovski's defense look like crap. Look what he did to Calvin Kattar. Calvin Kattar does not have bad defense, or a lot of people. But so Max can do that to pretty much anybody. I mean, Max stopped Jose Aldo twice, and Jose Aldo has amazing defense. And Volkanovski beat the crap out of him. Volkanovski is the best featherweight in the world, and maybe the best fighter in the world. I certainly think so. But he got into a little bit of a life or death fight at times with both Renato Moicano and Cub Swanson. They both had success against him on the feet. So his defense isn't great. I've said this before about Ortega when talking about some of the things he does really, really well. His ability to go straight to the danger portion of a submission when he attacks it is amazing. There's a procedure to everything you do when you attack a submission, especially if you get to jiu-jitsu guys who are really good, and especially if they're teaching, they break those things down in excruciating detail at times, and consequently everything becomes a step. And you need to, so you go through the steps, and when you have to defend against someone who really knows how to attack, you need to know at different steps along the process how much trouble you are, what defensive steps you can take to counter that, because those change depending on where you are and being in danger, etc., etc. Ortega's ability to go from, oh, I might be able to attack a neck here, to, oh crap, I'm being choked, is, again, it is genuinely amazing. There's very few people who can attack submissions like he can, and I genuinely mean this. Even amongst the professional, the professional high-level grappler circuit, that skill is exceptional even amongst those kinds of people, whoever you happen to think the best grapplers in the world are. Like, that skill of his even in those circles would be something to behold. He attacks like lightning, and he gets you to the point where you're in serious trouble in an instant. Look at how fast he jumps on someone's neck. It is quick. And he's not just jumping for it to jump for it. He has properly gone through all of what would be individual steps if you're being resisted or you're just still learning. He just gets to the near finishing portion of that technique fast enough to make your head spin, and then your vision spinning because you're being choked. His takedown game, though, is something that has not been great. And it's been a bit of a problem for him in certain fights. He's just not great about getting you down, which is kind of a shame because he is very good from top position. He's great from either position, actually. He's one of the few guys who is good on top and on bottom with his jiu-jitsu game. A lot of people are only really good in one of those phases. He's pretty good in both. But he can't always force things to be in that realm, which is to his detriment, because if he could reliably, he'd be a bigger threat, I think, if he could reliably bring his most dominant and dangerous skill set to bear. He's fighting a guy who has gas tank issues, and I know Rodriguez fought Max Holloway for 5 rounds and he didn't completely gas out, which was a little bit surprising to me. But he does have some cardio issues. He slowed down towards the end of that fight. Not as much as I expected to, but Max also didn't quite push the same pace I thought he would. Max got Max got Yair down a fair bit, actually. It was one of the ways he was able to kind of neutralize Yair's kicking game. Yair's very dangerous, especially that first round or so, round and a half. Yair is very dangerous. He is sharp. He is powerful. He is fast. Everything. The other thing about Rodriguez needs to be mentioned. Everything he does looks like it hurts. Some guys, they throw kicks and they connect, and you kind of go, yeah, that doesn't look pleasant, but that doesn't look like it hurt that much. Yair Rodriguez throws kicks like he is trying to break down a door every time. And it's not really sustainable over the long term, but you can also never take for granted, all right, he's kicking me, this one isn't going to be that hard, I can kind of block it and we'll just keep going. You've got to be prepared every time he kicks, because if you're loose with your guard or you're not on point with it, he's going to slam some bony part of his leg into your body. Rodriguez's boxing is still not great. His defense isn't great. These two guys are going to do damage to each other. That's one of the only things about this fight I'm fairly confident. These two are going to mess each other up for as long as this lasts. Neither guy is great defensively. I think the longer this goes, the more I would favor Ortega. They've both gone 5 rounds a few different times at this point. So that bears acknowledging. But I just think Ortega's style lends itself to longer fights more than Rodriguez's. This is also a question about who the damage has caught up with more, because it's not like Rodriguez has not been getting beaten up. Max Holloway did a pretty good number on him. Jeremy Stevens got to him at different points in their fight. Frankie Edgar hurt him a lot. His fight with Chan Sung Jung in 2018 was a total war that he was losing until he scored that miraculous kind of Hail Mary knockout. So these two are going to hurt each other. I'm going to lean towards Ortega just a bit, and I might feel very, very foolish about this, but here's part of my reasoning. If the striking isn't going the way of Rodriguez, he doesn't really have a secondary game he can go to. Ortega does. I don't know if Ortega's been working his takedown game a whole lot. Hopefully he has, because it would benefit his career so much if he could reliably force you to grapple with him. That makes him scarier than he is. Like, that seriously would be a scary proposition to have to deal with him, forcing you to go into his wheelhouse over and over and over again. But he's also, to Ortega's credit, he is very opportunistic with what he does in that respect. There's a lot of very good jiu-jitsu guys who can't recognize opportunities the way that Ortega does. So they kind of get stuck in the I have to take you down to start things working, whereas Ortega does not think that way. If he sees an opportunity to jump on something anywhere, he will do it. I'm leaning towards Ortega, but that's a lean, and I don't really know what's going to happen here. This fight could be very, very good. I think there's some serious potential here for a blood and guts war. So we'll have to wait and see, but that's your main event. Very relevant fight at featherweight. Very interesting fight. Co-main event. This is less interesting. Michelle Waterson will fight Amanda Lemos. What is that strawweight? Is she cutting back down? I want to say she tried flyweight. For her last fight, she tried flyweight. Okay, she's back at strawweight here. She did that kind of on short notice. Waterson is fighting Amanda Lemos. Lemos got choked out by Jessica Andrade in her last fight. Lost to Leslie Smith in her debut, but had won 5 in a row, actually. This might be can't say the last stand. This is something of a crossroads fight for Waterson. She's had some setbacks. If she's going to remain a relevant fixture around the title, she has to win this. And I'm going to pick Lemos. I just think Waterson's time is probably past. And Lemos is quite good. I won't be surprised if Waterson pulls this out, but this is kind of a must-win for her, depending on what her goals are for her remaining time in the sport. Welterweight, Li Jingliang and Muslim Salikov. Pretty good fight. Yeah, Jingliang got kind of run over by Khamzat Chimaev in his last fight. He knocked out Ponzinibbio before that. Lost to Neil Magny before that one. My inclination here is to lean towards Salikov. Salikov's on a good winning streak. He's 5-1 in the UFC? Yeah. Won his last 5. I'm not going to sleep on Jingliang. This is a very good fight in that respect. This is a very well-matched fight, but I am going to lean towards Salikov here. I think Jingliang will get suckered into trying to strike with him a little bit too much, and Salikov's the much better striker technically, and he might be the heavier puncher. Xing Liang has some power. People forget that that guy can crack, but I'm going to lean towards Salikov. Flyweight, Matt Schnell and Sumu Darji. Schnell on a bit of a rough. He had a really good fight with Brandon Royval. Didn't last all that long, but they got fight of the night back in May. He had a lot of success in that fight, and then just got caught in that guillotine by a very, very dangerous opponent. Sumu Darji's on a 3-fight winning streak, but this represents a pretty significant step up in competition for him. He's fought Andrei Sukumtat, Malcolm Gordon, and Zarek Adeshev. Yeah, Schnell is demonstrably better than those gentlemen. I'm going to lean towards Schnell, but this is a test for Sumu Darji more than anything else, and I'm just going to lean towards Schnell, who I like Schnell's game overall. I don't think he gets the respect he deserves because he kind of bounces between flyweight and bantamweight, and he fights tough opposition and doesn't always win. But Schnell's pretty darn good. Featherweights, keep your eye on this one. If you tell me, on paper what's going to be fight of the night, this is my pick, followed probably by the main event. Shane Burgos and Charles Jourdain. This is going to be nuts. Both men are strikers. Both men don't shy away from the fight. Burgos has been in some serious blood and guts wars. His last 3 fights. His fight with Josh Emmett was kind of a knockdown, drag-out war. The fight with Barboza was. The fight with Quarantillo was. That fight was unfortunately positioned on UFC 268 to take place right after the utter insanity that was Justin Gaethje and Michael Chandler. On any other fight card, and I absolutely mean this, any other fight card, Shane Burgos versus Billy Quarantillo from UFC 268 is your fight of the night. It just had to follow one of the fights of the year. Like, genuinely one of the best fights all year. But and then you've got Jourdain, who's been kind of coming into his own lately. He's won his last 2 fights. He beat Lando Venata in a fairly impressive fashion. I'm going to lean towards Burgos, and I might be foolish to do so but I think Burgos' pressure will be a problem for Jourdain. Jourdain he's a very good fighter. He's very technical. He's very athletic. But I don't know how he's going to handle the pace that Burgos is going to insist that they fight. And I'm not sure how Jourdain can deal with the physical damage. I might be wrong. He might hold up just fine, but that's kind of where my head is at the moment on him. So I'm going to lean towards Burgos, but circle that. Do not miss that fight. That's your can't miss fight of the evening on paper. Now watch it miss in practice because, MMA, but on paper, that's the one. That's the one from this card. And kicking off the main card, this was supposed to take place at UFC 267 or whatever. Women's flyweight, Lauren Murphy will welcome Miesha Tate to the division. The fact that Lauren Murphy is as highly ranked in that division as she is a pretty damning indictment on that division. Not that Lauren Murphy is some terrible fighter. She's not a terrible fighter. But when someone who fights like Lauren Murphy fights is one of your top contenders, that says a lot about everyone else. I think they gave Miesha Tate this fight because it is very winnable for her on paper. And they kind of want to force Miesha into the title picture. I'm going to pick Tate here, but that's what the UFC wants to happen. And Murphy is a very favorable stylistic matchup for Tate. So they're kind of stacking things in her favor. That said, I'm going to be kind of pulling for Murphy just to upset the apple cart because it always amuses me when the UFC doesn't get what it wants most of the time. Not every time, because sometimes they want what I want and deserves to be acknowledged as such. But stuff like this, yeah, you know what? No, I enjoy your apple cart being upset sometimes. So picking Tate, this seems kind of handpicked for her to be. Murphy represents the right combination of stylistically favorable, somewhat known to people who care, and high enough ranked, but still all of those things favoring Tate. And I imagine I'm going to rethink a little bit about. I would still favor Shevchenko to beat Miesha Tate, But Tate's got a lot of high-end experience, which is something a lot of other opponents of hers have been lacking. Look, if Tate wins, they are going to give her the title shot. That division is somewhat bereft of challengers. I mean, look, Tyler Santos wildly overperformed relative to expectations of the vast majority of people, but they're not really going to do an immediate rematch if they can. If Murphy wins, I think they will do an immediate rematch. If Tate wins, they'll give it to Tate. So it's kind of my read on that one. So that's your main card. As for the prelims, Ricky Simone and Jack Shore. It's a pretty good fight. Jack Shore is undefeated, 16-0. He has 5 wins in the UFC. He's been coming on recently. He's been doing really solid work. This is a big step up for him. And Ricky Simone is coming off of his win over Rafael dos Anjos. He stopped him with punches. This is a big test for sure. Simone has a motor. He's a relentless takedown artist. This is a tough one. This is a really tough fight. I think I'm going to lean towards Simone is kind of my hunch. But that's a close fight. That's a really good fight. Middleweight, Dalcha Lungiambula and Punahele Soriano. Soriano, I guess. That is your let's just hope this ends quickly fight of the evening. Featherweight, Bill Algeo and Herbert Burns. Pretty easy lean towards Algeo here. He's been a bit up and down in the UFC, but I think pretty highly of Algeo's overall ability. He's had some tough matchups. Burns coming off of that loss to Daniel Pineda. Yeah, picking Algeo here. Light heavyweight, Dustin Jacoby and Da-Un Jung. I appreciate the old Iron Turtle, Da-Un Jung. I believe he's the Iron Turtle. I think he changed his nickname recently. He has not lost in the UFC yet. He knocked out Kennedy Zachukwu with elbows November of last year. It was a really nice finish, actually. But I don't think he's got the technical chops to hang with Jacoby, and I don't think he's got the overall to hang with Jacoby's striking, and I'm not sure he's in a position to force Jacoby to just wrestle him continuously. So I'm going to lean Jacoby here. Middleweight, Dwight Grant and Dustin Stoltzfus. Kind of a must-win for Stoltzfus. He is 0-3 in the UFC with losses to Kyle Dawkins, Adolfo Vieira, and Gerald Mearshart. Whereas Grant, not exactly in the best spot. His UFC record is 3-4 on a 2-fight losing streak. I'm going to pick Grant here just because I have not been terribly impressed with Stoltzfus thus far, but, desperate men, the old cliche about dangerous or animals that are cornered being the most dangerous. Stoltzfus has to know his back is against the wall here. So, welterweight, Philip Rowe and Abubakar Nurmagomedov. This is a pretty solid fight actually for lower-ish and welterweights. Philip Rowe is 2-1 in the UFC. He lost his debut to Gabe Green, but he rebounded nicely with wins over Orion Kosei and Jason Witt, both of those stoppages. Whereas Abubakar Nurmagomedov has gone 1-1 in the UFC. He dropped his debut. He actually was doing a number on David Zavada before he got caught in that triangle choke. Then he pretty much beat the crap out of Jared Gooden. This is not an easy fight for Rowe, but not an easy fight for either of them. This is, I think, a little bit tougher for Rowe, so I'm going to lean towards Nurmagomedov, but yeah, I'm going to lean Nurmagomedov. And kicking off the entire card, Jessica Penne, women's strawweight. Jessica Penne and Emily Ducati. Penne just is. She won twice last year, beating Lupita Godinez via split decision, and then she submitted Karolina Kowalkiewicz. Ducati is making her UFC debut. She had a pretty extensive run in Bellator, lost more than she won, but she fought Alimale McFarland twice. Then she's coming off of a run in Invicta, where she was the strawweight champion. Her only loss in Invicta was a split decision. She's on a 3-fight winning streak. Not an easy fight. I think I'm going to lean towards Ducati. It's kind of at the point where I don't really pick Jessica Penne to win. Just a really unfortunate thing to say because she's been around for a long time and she's not a bad fighter, but if we're just talking predictions. So I'm going to pick Ducati, but that's a pretty stiff test for a debut. That's a pretty stiff test for a UFC debut. All right, that's it. That's the cards that currently stands. Again, I will have coverage in the MMA Zone of 411mania.com Saturday morning. Prelims begin at 11 a.m. Eastern. Just reiterating that. So stop by, say hello. Hopefully, help wake me up. I will see you all there again, hopefully. All right, let's move on to news of the week. This got a little bit of play during the week, but it was after I recorded the shows last week, so I didn't get to talk about it. But movie star, actor Chris Pratt was in attendance for UFC 267 and was asked for his thoughts on the main event, where Israel Adesanya defeated Jared Cannonier, and he wasn't terribly complimentary. He said he didn't care much for the pitter-patter stuff and whatnot, and he apologized after the fact. Someone asked him for his reaction. He's on camera. He gave it. And he didn't say anything that a lot of other people didn't say. Just for the record, he was not at all on the. In fact, you could argue he took the popular position, or that's unfair. Because the way I phrased that implies that he took it because it was popular. His position was in line with a lot of people's after that fight. So again, after the fact, he apologized for some of the tenor of what he said. Adesanya was kind of asked about this at the post-fight press conference, and I didn't talk about this when I talked about the event, but Adesanya, this has become a bit more apparent like in the weeks after. Adesanya's back is up a little bit about this one. Like his hackles are up about some of the criticism that was levied at him around this performance. And in fairness to his position, some of the criticism levied at him has been unfair and it's been one-sided, ignoring the responsibility that would fall on Jared Cannonier for how the fight turned out. But he took some of this criticism. I mean, saying he took it personally might be an exaggeration, but he was not. He has taken similar criticism in other fights with a different tenor to what he has said, with a different outlook. Again, it felt like his hackles were up a little bit on this one. But anyway, he said, shut up. I can do what you do. You can't do what I can do. And this is where this is where I now feel compelled to comment. Again, Pratt apologized after a little bit later for, again, some of the specifics about what he said. But to Israel Adesanya, sir, I appreciate the fact that you have been the subject of some very mean-spirited, bad faith, and frankly, in some cases, unfair criticism. For a lot of his... People forget this, man. For a lot of his UFC career, there's been a fairly significant chunk of the fan base, and I don't just mean in terms of vocally, I mean numerically, that has been very critical of him, that does not like him, and that has been kind of, the hyenas waiting for him to fail. The number of people, and I remember this, who did the he got exposed by Jan Blachowicz thing. That was a real talking point that a lot of people, a lot of fans, were bringing up, which is somewhat ridiculous. So, I understand you have been the subject of unfair criticism. You live a giant chunk of your life in the public eye. I don't envy anyone that sucks. And I get that you are pushing back, and I get that there's a lot of people, and what I'm about to say cuts both ways here, so let me get to my point. But you, sir, cannot act. I guarantee it. Now, this is something that fighters do a lot, and it's not just Adesanya. This is an observable pattern about a lot of fighters. Fighters have as a general rule, fighters have pretty thin skins. Look at I think both Michael Bisping and Daniel Cormier have commented on this. And let's be clear about those two gentlemen. They were pretty uppity. Uppity is the wrong phrase there. Um, they were sensitive. They were quick to lash out and bite back against criticism that was levied at them. I remember Bisping being pissed about people talking about his lack of punching power consistently. When he beat Yoshihiro Akiyama years ago, couldn't finish him, but won the fight cleanly, clear unanimous decision. He kind of busted up Akiyama's face, and one of the first things he said at his post-fight interview, not in the cage, like the press conference, was, people say I can't punch. Well, ask Akiyama if I can punch. Like that kind of, I think that criticism kind of ate at him. He was very quick to defend himself in those respects and to kind of lash out. Daniel Cormier was the same way. And I'm sure they had their reasons. If you ask them about them, I'm sure they'd tell you. Or even if they couldn't remember them specifically, if you asked them, about their mindset and whatnot at the time, they could tell you why they did what they did, why they behaved the way they behaved. Both of them become media members. They are part of the broadcast team. They do fighter interviews. They do commentary and whatnot. And since taking on that responsibility and that job, they have, in the course of doing that job, said things that fighters did not like, and other fighters have lashed out at them. And I think if you were to ask them about this, they would probably tell you, yes, fighters are very sensitive. We're not operating in bad faith. But if we think your fight's not great, if we think there's this problem, if we see something, we're going to say it because that's what we're doing. We are meant to broadcast. Our job is to call the action and tell the story of the fight. Our job is not to make you look good. Our job is not to make you feel good. And there's a lot of fighters that have just very thin skins. And one of the constant deflections about this is, well, if you don't fight, if you don't train, shut up. Which is ridiculous. You see this in any field wherein your profession is subject to public criticism. When I say public criticism, I don't mean, the average Joe. I mean there are professional critics. People who write music and who perform music say this about music critics. People who are actors, people who make movies. There's a number of actors and directors and whatnot who are of the opinion that if you haven't made a movie, your criticism of film is invalid. These people exist. And this is true of fighters. This has been true of boxers too, by the way, just for the record. I'm not singling out MMA fighters as crybabies. They're not. But there is this, it amused, that particular line, that line of reasoning amused me in particular about, Cormier and Bisping and Dominic Cruz and all of these ex-fighters, most of them ex-champ, all of those three in particular, ex-champions. There were fighters who weren't happy with when Randy Couture would do commentary. There were fighters who were not happy with him. That guy's one of the all-time greats. And he's going to call the action as he sees it. There were a lot of fighters who just, and you can't say it anymore. You can't say, well, if you don't fight, shut up. A lot of these people are significantly more successful and more talented than you are. So you come up with some other thing that you can gripe about because you just don't want to hear criticism. And I understand that because I understand how difficult it is to do what MMA fighters do. That is so many hours of training, so much pain, so much emotional stress, so much mental stress, so much physical stress. And it all distills to a singular moment in time, somewhere between 15 and 25 minutes, wherein everything you do, everything you are, everything you have worked for, is now under the microscope of people who lack context, who don't know your pain, who don't know your journey, who don't know any of that, who then talk about what you did. And on an emotional level, I understand. I do. And when it comes to fighting at all, much less fighting professionally at the highest level, the vast majority of humanity do not even begin to understand how difficult that is. There's a famous, the satirical news site, The Onion, has one of their like best headlines ever was, local man overestimates his fighting ability by 4,000%. This is true. Like, again, it's The Onion, it's satirical, it's overblown, but that sentiment is incredibly true. Fighting is one of two things that people, mostly men, not exclusively but mostly, think they are good at by virtue of existing. There is no respect given to the skill of fighting as a general. The number of people I know I have heard say, I can handle myself if I have to fight. And I know they can't. I know they can't. In fact, I'm trying to insult this guy because I love Mark. But Mark Radulich at one point was like, I think if I had to, I could maybe tie up and kind of stall out most, MMA fighters. We were talking about like some crazy feat of athletic strength that Yoel Romero had done. Again, Yoel Romero looks like a superhero. That guy was drawn from, looks like he was, chiseled out of stone, a comic book character, whatever descriptor you want to throw there. But, and I love Mark. He's one of my best friends in the whole world. But no. No. And Mark's trained a little bit. But again, no. Uh, and again, men in particular, because I don't know why this is in particular. I don't know what, combination of biology and culture exists in men, but this is true, like, this is somewhat true cross-culturally. That men I think because men understand that, the propensity for violence and understand that we are expected to be the ones meeting violence. So it takes up a little bit more of our headspace. To say nothing of, the fact that testosterone influences all of this, and testosterone makes you do stupid things. As a general rule, it influences you to do stupid things. Does a lot of other things that are not, that are great, so necessary hormone. But I saw someone describe it as testosterone makes you think it's a good idea to jump in a wagon with three of your buddies, like the little red like wagons, and ride down a hill in it. Do the old Calvin and Hobbes. Like that's what testosterone does, and it's really kind of true. But men tend to, and because we think we should be good at fighting because we're men, we think we are. We have seen, we watch, whether you watch just the stylized, movie violence or you watch actual fights or whatnot, the assumption is, I know how to fight. I could handle myself if things go down. Bull. Absolute bull. For anyone out there who might be considering, I promise I'm getting to the point. I know this is a little bit rambly, but if you're curious about how much of a martial art you need for effective self-defense, is one of those things. Again, if you are concerned about being attacked, I got news for you. You do not need to be a jiu-jitsu black belt to defend yourself against the vast majority of humanity. You don't need it. You don't need a brown belt. You don't even really need a purple belt. If you're a good blue belt, congratulations. You know pretty much everything you're going to need to know if you have to defend yourself in a real-world scenario. Now, don't get me wrong, there's complications here. I'm aware of that. I'm aware that, weapons complicate things. Multiple attackers complicate things. But just hear me out on this. If your primary concern is I need to know what to do and need to feel confident in myself against the average human being, if you have a legitimate jiu-jitsu blue belt, congratulations. You can beat most other people on the planet. That's reality. When you get to like purple, and for those of you who may not necessarily remember this, the jiu-jitsu belt rankings is white, blue, purple, brown, black, then red. But you don't need to be a black belt. You really don't. Like, the stuff you learn and you drill and you work when you're a black belt is stuff to compete against other black belts. If you get jumped by a guy in a bar, when again, something on the street kind of pops off, you don't need to know how to apply a reverse bow and arrow choke, or the intricacies of De La Hiva versus reverse De La Hiva, and how your entries into leg entanglements come out of 50-50, out of the saddle versus 50-50, to the extent there's a difference. You don't need so much of what you learn and what you do and what you drill as a black belt. It is so unnecessary to defend yourself against a random person who decides he wants to throw a punch at you. Or if you get into a fight again, you don't need it. You don't need it. If you have a legitimate blue belt, you can handle yourself one-on-one against the vast majority of the human race. Straight up. If you're, do boxing or kickboxing, if you have a good instructor, 6 to 8 months. If you train and you spar and you focus, I don't necessarily mean hard, but if you're 3 times a week, 6 to 8 months, with a good boxing or kickboxing instructor, and again, all the other associated training, you can handle yourself against pretty much, again, most of humanity. You can handle them. Most people have never been hit in the face. Most people have never hit another human being or been hit. Most people don't know what it feels like. Most people don't know how to brace themselves. This is why if you ever watch fights in the street, if somebody doesn't land a clean punch in the first 3 or not even seconds, watch these fights. They're on YouTube, or there's like a whole subreddit that's just about fights that take place in reality. If somebody doesn't land something clean in the first 3 or 4 punches, one, everybody's paddling the invisible canoe, which is a mockery about your punching technique. Second, they're throwing 50 strikes in 4 seconds. None of them are landing. Or if they're landing, they're certainly not landing clean. Then you hug. Then you fall to the ground. Then you hope everyone pulls you apart because neither of you knows what you're doing down there. And this is far and away the vast majority of physical violence. Weapons change things, I know. But you don't need a whole lot to be able to deal with the average person. This does not mean you can attend one seminar and feel good. You do have to train, you have to put in the effort. I don't delve into my own martial arts journey a lot here because it's not usually relevant, but since I'm talking about this, I started training again almost 4 years ago. 4 years in November. Now, I do not attend a very hardcore school. I'm happy that I'm in better shape than I was. I'm down. The first year or so, I lost 20 some odd pounds. Most of that in the first handful of months, because that's how weight loss works. Actually, you lose a lot up front. I lost weight. I am more flexible. I am stronger, and fun, friends, and fitness is a perfectly valid reason to join a martial arts gym. I am also, for the most part, let me be clear about what I'm about to say. There's a lot of people who could beat the crap out of me. I know of some of them. And there's a lot of, complicating factors if you wind up in a fight, if you wind up in a self-defense situation, phrase it like that. But I am not actually all that worried about, especially if you do what, some people do when they choose to fight illegally, fight in the street. Somebody squares up, somebody tries a punch, and it winds up kind of like one-on-one. I'm not terribly concerned about most people if that's what they want to do. I don't want to fight anybody. Again, this is not me looking for a fight. I don't want to be in a fight. I haven't been in a fight since I was in junior high. Last time I was in kind of a physical fight. Junior high kids. It was a physical altercation. I wouldn't necessarily call it a fight. So I am, 2 decades removed from my last. I've sparred, but my last like serious, quasi-serious fight, way removed from it. I don't want to be in a fist fight with anyone. Certainly not under those circumstances. I might look for something to compete, but I don't want that. So when I say I'm not terribly concerned about how I might have to handle myself, that's not me saying I can beat up the world. It's me saying I spar somewhat regularly. I drill, I train. If somebody wants to throw hands at me, I might get beat. That's certainly a possibility. You never know who you're squaring up against if you choose to fight like that, but I have a degree of competence relative to the average untrained person who thinks that who just gets angry and wants to, throw a punch and then clinch up and hope people separate us because I don't know what I'm doing on the ground. And all that is to say, again, what professional fighters, most people don't understand anything about what it takes to be good at even the barest bit of real fighting. To say nothing of fighting at the level that Israel Adesanya operates at. So, very true. There's very few people who can do what Israel Adesanya does. This notion that because you can fight, you can do other things, however, is profoundly untrue, and I'm going to stick up for actors here. The other reason I feel compelled to comment, because not only again do I train a little bit, I know what it takes to... I'm not an actor, preface this, but I know what it takes to be a good actor, much less a great actor, because Pratt is a very good actor. Acting is an incredibly difficult job, and people don't think about it in those terms because they see the final product, they see the glitz, they see the glamour. They don't see how many takes you do. They don't see the long hours. They don't see the early call times. They don't understand what it takes to put yourself in a emotional state to do whatever is necessary for the shoot that day. If the first scene you're shooting that day is the most emotional thing in the movie, and it's, sometimes those are the first things you shoot all movie. You got to show up on set day one ready to tap into that part of the human experience and relate that through the camera to the audience. And then you go shoot something lighthearted. And it is very, very difficult to be an actor, and people don't realize this. So the notion that Adesanya could do what Chris Pratt does, Izzy, Mr. Adesanya, you are one of the best fighters in the world. You are a spectacular striker. I am in awe of what you do. You are not an actor, and you could not do what Chris Pratt does. Which needs to be said there. So, again, Adesanya seems to be a little bit done with elements of the criticism levied at him, which he's dealt with it for a long time. And again, he's dealt with a lot of it that's bad faith. Like I said, I stand by what I said about the fight with Cannonier, so take that for whatever that's worth. But those two had a little bit of a public thing that I thought deserved a little bit of discussion here. So, moving on. Let's see. Okay, we got a little bit of an update on Alexander Volkanovski. He will be undergoing surgery. He broke one of his thumbs, I think his left, in the second round of his fight with Max Holloway. Bear in mind, the fact that he went on to continue to do what he did for the rest of that fight with a broken thumb, if you weren't in awe of what he did before, be in awe more now. And if you were already, pile on a little bit more respect to that man. So he's going to be out for a little bit while he gets that fixed surgically. That removes a potential complicating factor from the lightweight title picture for probably the rest of the year. And depending on the surgery, any potential complications and whatnot, I don't think it's going to be a big deal, but it does take a piece off of the board as far as lightweight goes. Alright, a minor note on some fight announcements here. Darren Till is out of his fight. He was supposed to fight Jack Hermansson later this month. Yeah, it's later in July, towards the end of the month. The London card he was supposed to be on. Let me double check that. Yeah, the 23rd. So, anyway, he fell out of that fight, some kind of an injury, I believe knee injury. That guy can't stay healthy. In steps instead the action man Chris Curtis. He will fight Jack Hermansson. Pretty big step up for Curtis, but good on him. Uh, that's a downgrade for the local crowd. Again, that fight is taking place in London, and Darren Till is a fairly big star in the UK. But if we're just talking about, purely the fight on paper, it's kind of a lateral move. So we'll have a full preview of that event next week. But yeah, so be on the lookout for that. All right. That's all I have written down. Let me check Twitter, see if anything crazy is broken while we've been recording. If not, we will do plugs and we will get out of here. Nope, nothing MMA related. All right. Plugs. Last week, there was a Damn You Hollywood for Minions, The Rise of Gru. That was myself and Mark Radulich. We had a fun time. We got a little bit of a trip down memory lane because the Minions franchise, the entire Despicable Me franchise, has led to some interesting podcasts between myself and Mark. So this one was no different, even though The Rise of Gru is not exactly hefty material. But you can listen to our review of that over on Damn You Hollywood. This week is Thor: Love and Thunder. God help me. That's going to be me, Mark, I believe Alexis Hana, and then David Wright. Let me double check that. I would like to be certain. Not Alexis, just me, Mark, and David. So that will be this Tuesday at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's over on the W2M network, or wherever you're listening to this, punch in Damn You Hollywood on a podcast catcher. You'll find it there. Again, if you want to see it live. Facebook, Twitch, and YouTube, all under the, again, W2M network. So give Twitter, too, actually, for those of you who do the Twitter live thing. You can find it there. We will be having a discussion about that. Should be something. Haven't seen the movie yet. We'll see it before we review it, of course. Other than that, my usual spate of coverage this week. So that's AEW's Dark Elevation on Monday. MLW, they have Kings of Colosseum this week on Thursday. And WWE SmackDown on Friday. Boy, was last SmackDown terrible. I gave it a not-so-good rating, and I think I was generous, actually. Not a good show. See if this week can rebound or not. But I will have that. And then, of course, Saturday morning, UFC on ABC3. We will be back here next week for a review of UFC on UFC on ABC3 and a preview of UFC on ESPN Plus 66. Again, that's their return to the O2 Arena in London, headlined by Curtis Blades and Tom Aspinall. So, full preview next week. How's that card looking, actually? That's not a bad card. I don't think there's anything great. I mean, Aspinall and Blades is a very relevant heavyweight fight. If Tom Aspinall blows through Curtis Blades the way he's been taking out everybody else, it'll be a big statement for him. It'll be a big statement. But there's nothing great on paper, but there's not that much that makes me... there's actually not a whole lot there that's kind of bad. So, full preview next week. Hopefully the card holds together. Yeah. All right. Until then, thank you all very, very much. I always appreciate it. See you next time. As always, stay safe out there and continue to be well, be safe, and behave.